Welcome, everybody, and welcome to our live stream audience for this Academy for Teachers mini master class with Andy Goodman, who started his career writing for TV. He wrote for Dinosaurs, which was a joint production of the Henson Group and Disney, I believe. Is that right?
That's correct.
Annie. And then he got into thinking about stories in a more serious way, and he founded a place called the Goodman Center, which has a beautiful mission of teaching nonprofits how to tell stories to communicate and further their missions. And he gives workshops like this all over the world to all manner of nonprofits, foundations, and other kinds of good, what do you call it, do-gooders, right? You service the do-gooders of the world, Andy. Right. So we're delighted to have you here. It's great. He's volunteered to do this today. He came to us because one of our board members, Barbara Rejo, is his older sister, and I think she is in one of these corners spying on her brother and making sure he he does all right. Thank you, Andy, for doing this today, and I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Sam. Let me share my screen so that everybody can see what we're talking about here. Hold on one second. Very good. Can you all see that okay? Well, greetings from Los Angeles. I'm Andy Goodman, director of the Goodman Center, as Sam just said. We do all the things he just said, and we've been doing them for 22 years. So as I like to say, we're old enough to vote, but not old enough to rent a car. We have been doing storytelling workshops for all kinds of organizations. We work with nonprofits, as Sam mentioned. We work with foundations and government agencies. We work with colleges and universities, and we have some corporate clients as well. We've also done work over the last 7 years with the teacher every year through the Council of Chief State School Officers, CCSSO. I get to work with the National Teachers of the Year from all 50 states and U.S. territories. And as Sam mentioned, I've also been lucky enough to work all around the globe, working with people like CARE in Guatemala, First Nations tribes in British Columbia, ALU down there, that's the African Leadership University. And so it's really taught me that no matter where you go, everyone's telling stories, and they tend to tell them the same way. That's what we're going to focus on today. In the time we have together, we're going to do three things. First, I want to answer the question, why is storytelling your most powerful communications tool? I believe it's the single most powerful communications tool you have. That's the case I want to make to you today. Then we're going to do an exercise to help you understand the structure of a good story. There is a structure that's been handed down to us from the earliest myths and fables. You know it. Today, I'm just going to remind you of what that structure is. And while you're doing that, for the folks in the live stream audience, because the people here today are going to be going off in their breakout rooms, for the live stream audience, I'm going to talk to you about something called the Marshall-Ganz model of storytelling. So a special section there just for you live streamers. And then when we all come back together, we're going to talk about the results of that storytelling exercise, and we're going to review fundamental story structure. And then we'll leave some time at the end for Q&A, and you can use the chat box for that. So that's what we're going to do. So first, let's talk about why storytelling is so powerful. And here's argument number one. Stories help us remember. And just stop and think about that for a second. If somebody tells you something and you instantly forget it, in one ear, out the other, I do that a lot, game over. That piece of information has no chance to affect how you think and behave again, right? But if somebody can tell you something in a way that actually sticks in your brain and stays there, then it has a chance to affect how you think and behave. And stories have that quality. And this was illustrated beautifully in a study done by the University of Minnesota with 5-year-olds. Let me tell you how the study worked. They invited a researcher into these pre-K or kindergarten classes filled with 5-year-olds. And the researcher sat down with the kids and said, good morning, kids, gather around. I want to play a fun game with you to test your memories. And here's how the game works. I'm going to hold up cards, like you see in the illustration, with 2 panels and 2 pictures. and I'm going to ask you to memorize what you see. So, for example, she holds up the first card and she says, here's our first pair, soap and shoe. In this game, soap and shoe go together. Can you remember that, everybody? And the 5-year-olds are like, uh-huh. Then she holds up a second card. And this one has, let's say, a bucket of paint and a baseball bat. She says, I want you to remember that too. Soap and shoe, bat and paint. Very good. Then she holds up a third card. And this one has a daisy and a cloud. She says, I want you to remember that too. Soap and shoe, bat and paint, daisy and cloud. And she holds up for the 5-year-olds 21 cards, 21 pairs for the 5-year-olds to remember. And after she showed them all 21, that was a lot to take in. Let's take a break, everybody. Go out in the playground and play for an hour. 1 hour. 60 minutes later, she brings them back in, gathers them around again. She says, okay, kids, here comes the second half of the game. This is the really fun part. Now I'm going to show you those cards again with the 2 pictures, but this time, one of the pictures is going to be missing, and you have to tell me what's missing. So, Sam, I'm going to call on you to make a guess, so unmute your line. 1 hour later, 21 pairs. How many do you think the 5-year-olds were able to reconstruct? Can't hear you. I'm going to say one, he says. And 1 is right. You definitely know 5-year-olds. Because let's face it, they're 5. All right, we're just getting started. Our researcher now goes to another class on another day. Same 21 pairs, but this time, slight twist in the game. As she holds up each pair, she says to the kids, as I show you each pair, I'm going to call on one of you to put the words in a sentence for the whole class to hear. So she holds up the first pair with the soap and the shoe, and she calls on one of the kids. And Sam, actually, I would like to hear your voice this time if I could. So she calls on 5-year-old Sam Swope. She says, Sam, would you please put the words soap and shoe in a sentence for the whole class to hear whenever you're ready?
The soap cleans my shoe.
Thank you. Very articulate for 5. The soap cleans my shoe. The kids hear 21 sentences, go out and play for an hour, bring them back and test them. Sam, compared to the first group that only got 1, how do you think this group did? Same, better, or worse? And how many?
I'm going to say 10.
Almost. 8 out of 21 pairs. All right, one more school, one more day, one more fresh group of 5-year-olds. Same 21 pairs, but this time the instruction, put the words in a sentence that asks a question. So there also happens to be a 5-year-old Sam in this class. 5-year-old Sam, please put the word soap and shoe in a sentence that asks a question whenever you're ready.
Which tastes better, soap or shoes?
Good question. Tastes better, soap or shoes? The kids hear 21 questions. Again, they go out and play for an hour, bring them back and test them. Compared to the first 2 groups, Sam, 1, 8. How do you think this group did?
Do I get a prize?
You sure do.
Okay. I'm going to say 18.
Almost. 16. 16 out of 21 pairs remembered. So look at these results side by side by side. And you tell me, what did the researchers conclude was happening in these kids' brains by virtue of hearing a question that was happening not so much when they just saw the pairs and almost not at all when they just saw the 8 out of 21 was when they heard the sentence, and the 1 out of 21 was that just saw the pairs. But what was different about hearing a question? Well, think about it for a second. What happens when someone asks you a question? Even if they're not asking it directly to you, it's our involuntary response to posit an answer. That's just human nature. This is, by the way, why so much advertising asks questions. You know, prior to us all being stuck inside, if you were driving down the highway and you passed a billboard and it says, wouldn't you like to be in Paris right now? You're like, yes, I would, right? So when they heard questions, they were more likely to answer, which tastes better, the soap or the shoe? And they would think, well, probably, well, actually neither, but if I had to guess, and they start to construct in their minds the rudiments of a story, where somebody is doing something to somebody else and there's an outcome. So the takeaway from this study, and this has been confirmed by many other studies, and it's true for everyone listening today, if you have some facts that you want people to remember, it is much more likely they'll remember those facts if they're contained within a story than if you just the facts. Stories help us remember. That's number one. Secondly, and I think even more important, is that stories can change how we think and behave. They can help us change our minds. And just stop for a moment and think about this. Right now, you have in your brain literally thousands of stories about the way the world works. And every time you confront a new situation, meet a new person, go to a new place, have a new experience, your brain is dialing up the story that's most like the situation so you can understand how to navigate it. If you find something that matches, full speed ahead. If you don't, your guard is up. So if we want to change how people think and behave, sometimes we have to change the story. We have to change the software that's running their brains. And this was done in a classic campaign around the issue of organ donation. Now, I know this is not anybody's particular issue here, but let's stop for a moment and talk about organ donation. In the US, if you're asked to check that box in the DMV form, if you'll donate your organs, about 54% say yes and about 46% say no. So a little under half say no. The people who say no, some of them have medical excuses and cannot. But a lot of people who say no because they have a very powerful story, a very powerful narrative in their head about the way the world works that leads them to say no. Now, who could tell me, what are the stories against organ donation? If you have it, just raise your hand or chime in. What do you think are the most common reasons people give why they're saying, no, not for me? And don't be afraid to guess, because you're going to be right.
It's against
Anybody?
my religion. It's against my religion.
Against my religion. That's in the top 5. Absolutely. When I go to meet my maker, I have to be all there, right? The world's largest religions all endorse organ donation. So it's actually not legitimate. But there are other, who can tell me another one? Come on, there's a big one out there.
That they won't be saved.
Won't get saved. Number one answer. Doctors will not work as hard to save me, or emergency workers won't work as hard. It's like when I leave here today, I go to drive to my home and God forbid I'm in a car accident. And the ambulance comes to save me and they say, quick, let's get this guy to the hospital. Oh, wait, he's an organ donor? Take the long way, you know? We need the kidneys. Here are the top 4. Won't work as hard to save me, religious beliefs. Some people think that they're too old to donate. You can be as old as 80 in many cases. And then my personal favorite, people believe that their organs won't go to the most deserving next person, that rich and famous people will jump the line and my liver will go to a Kardashian, something like that. Now, none of these are true. They are not true. But people believe this stuff. And it leads to a problem. Look at these numbers from Donate Life America. Right now in the US, there are about 120,000 people waiting for an organ. The need so far exceeds the supply that look at that number in the middle. 22 people die every day waiting for an organ that's never coming. Well, that's 22 tragedies a day. So if we want to up the rate of donations, get more people to sign up, what do? Well, if we present them with this data, do you know what they say? They say, gosh, that's a shame. That really, that sounds terrible. I'm so sorry. But doctors won't work as hard to save me. Religious beliefs, Kardashian, whatever, they're sticking with their story. The only way that you're going to change their minds and change their behavior is to give them a more powerful story, a more resonant story, something that literally changes the software running their brain. And this was done, and done brilliantly, in a campaign in the town in the red box there. It's pronounced Recife in Portuguese. Looks like Recife, Recife. Well, if you've ever been to Recife or Brazil or South America, or if you've never been to any of those places, I'll bet you still know that everyone in Recife, everyone in Brazil, everyone in South America, they're all crazy for the same thing. Just absolutely nuts for the same thing. Who knows what it is? Shout it out.
Soccer.
Or what they call?
Football.
Football, exactly. Football. We call it soccer. They call it football. In Recife, the local team is called Sport Club do Recife. That line with 3 stars, that's their logo. It's everywhere in town. People love this team. People would die for this team. Now, hold on. There's a thought. If they would die for the team, would they donate their organs for the team? Well, believe it or not, this was the genesis of a campaign where they went right to the fans of this team and said, if you truly love this team, sign up for an organ donor card, looks like this, emblazoned with the logo of the team. And should anything happen to you, donate your organs on behalf of the team. But here's the story. Here's the new narrative they gave them. They said, if you're truly a fan, and something should happen to you and you donate your organs, your fandom will live on forever. Become an immortal fan. That was the name of the campaign. Now, you might laugh, you might smirk and say, well, that's silly. This campaign was wildly successful. And I want to show you a short video that chronicles that success. Take a look.
Amar, não tem comparação, torcida, não tem. O resto é resto, o esporte é tudo. Primeiro Deus, segundo esporte, terceira família e quarto meu trabalho.
Que os seus olhos vão continuar assistindo o esporte.
Que os seus pulmões continuarão respirando pelo esporte.
Prometo que o seu coração sempre baterá pelo esporte.
Hoje a maior dificuldade que existe no processo de doação é o sim da família.
Eu sou rubro-negra até depois de morrer, irmão. Ter a alma é rubro-negra.
Ainda mais que quando eu doar meus órgãos, meu pulmão for pro cara do Náutico, torcedor do Náutico, ele vai respirar o esporte.
A campanha atingiu números impressionantes. 51 mil torcedores se declararam doadores, uma quantidade superior à capacidade da Ilha do Retiro.
A campanha do esporte, eu não tenho dúvida alguma que serviu para que, aumentando a oferta de doadores, a gente conseguisse zerar essa lista, conseguisse realizar realmente o transplante em todos que estavam precisando.
Uma campanha de doação de órgãos lançada pelo esporte está ajudando a salvar a vida de muitos torcedores.
Antes do vídeo, eu tinha passado 18 anos de diabético e 5 anos fazendo hemodiálise. E a vida só está melhorando, minha visão está voltando aos pouquinhos. Eu renasci de novo.
Para mim, disse, olha, a gente tem um provável coração para sua mãe. Você pode trazer ela, com certeza. Fiquei aliviado de saber que eu ainda iria poder ter ela.
How about that? Isn't that amazing? 51,000 people sign up for the card. That number well north of 60,000 now. The waiting list for heart and corneal transplants drops to 0. And even better, sport clubs from Paris and Barcelona called them afterwards and said, how do we do that here? So this very clever idea radiating around the globe. But don't lose the larger point, because we're not here to talk about football or soccer or organ donation. We're talking about how people communicate, how they think and learn and change. And I think what really sums up the whole approach here is what Daniel Kahneman writes about in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow. If you have not read this book, I highly recommend it. It really is all about how people think. Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in economics for this book and his other work. He's actually a psychologist by trade, but won the Nobel Prize in economics. And in the book, he says this: no one ever made a decision because of a number. They need a story. Now, please read this closely, because what he is not saying, and what I'm not saying is, I'm not saying the numbers don't matter. I'm not saying the data, the metrics don't matter. What we're saying is that if you want to change someone's mind, change how they think and behave, it starts with a story that gets them nodding their head and saying, yes, that makes sense to me. That is the way the world works. And then it's backed by data that says, and we have more than one story to tell you here. The way I like to say it is, if you're trying to change the world for the better, and I do think that's everybody listening today, if you're trying to change the world for the better, you're often first in the business of changing the stories in people's heads about the way the world works. So stories help us remember, so the information sticks and changes how we think and behave, making it, I submit to you, the most powerful communications tool you have, bar none. So that brings us to part 2. So how do we do it? How do we make sure that we're telling memorable and persuasive stories every time we tell a story? And for that, I want to take the people in the Academy who've joined us today, and we're going to do a little exercise. I'm going to give you the instructions, and then we're going to put you in breakout rooms. I think Renee's going to take care of that. And for those of you who are remaining, we have something for you, so don't go away. But here's how the storytelling exercise works. So when you get into your room, when you get into your room, here's your assignment. Spend 2 minutes thinking about a time in your life when you really wanted something. Okay? Anytime, anything. Preferably not even work related. Just some time when there's something that you really, really wanted. Okay? Don't overthink it. The first thing that pops in your mind, that's fine. Doesn't have to be world peace. Okay? So after a couple of minutes, people to think, then we're going to go around your little breakout room, and each of you is going to have 2 minutes to tell a story about that time to the people in your group. 2 minutes, okay? Now, if you set up your screen in gallery view, you know, with you see a bunch of boxes there, work your way from left to right or clockwise, just so you make sure so you don't have an argument about who goes first, okay? Whoever's going last in that setup, you will be timekeeper. So you keep an eye on 2 minutes, all right? And what you should do in your little box there is keep an eye on it and flash a 1 when 1 minute has elapsed and flash a 2 when 2 minutes have elapsed, okay? Now, if you're the speaker, if you're telling your story and you see a 2, it does not mean stop dead in the middle of your heartfelt story. It simply means your time has elapsed, wrap up as quickly as you can, our group is falling behind. But believe me, I've done this enough times. 2 minutes is plenty of time to tell us. And when we get to the last person, they can pass their timekeeping responsibilities to whoever went first. If we're in groups of 4 or 5, we should be able to do this in just about 10 or 12 minutes. So those are the instructions. Before we break you out, any questions about the instructions? Anybody not clear on what we're doing? I will take silence as consent. So Renee, do you want to break them up into their breakout groups?
All right, so I have gotten you here into groups of 4 or 5. And so I am going to send you off now. And I think we have a couple people who aren't assigned, so I'll get you into a group just as quickly as possible. All right, we'll be back in, how long do we have, Andy?
I think we have 15 minutes for this segment. So from
15 minutes.
1:35 to 1:35 to 1:50.
Sounds perfect. All right, enjoy yourselves.
Now, can I assume that we are continuing with our live stream group? Has everyone been assigned? Okay.
It looks like it.
All right, for you live streamers, a little bonus. I want to talk to you about a model of storytelling that comes from a gentleman named Marshall Ganz. I hope you'll find this very, very useful. Marshall Ganz, if you've never heard of him, is currently a lecturer in public policy at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. And when he talks about storytelling and telling stories to lead change, stories of leadership, people listen because he has a very unique background. Let me give you a quick bio on him. Ganz went to Harvard as an undergraduate in the early 1960s, I think it was 60 or 61, fully intending to graduate in 4 years. But in 1964, he dropped out because he saw what was happening in the American South at that time, in Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, and how the fight for civil rights was really heating up. So he dropped out of school, joined the Freedom Riders, and went down to fight for civil rights in a very dangerous and turbulent time. Well, after a few years of that, he didn't feel like going back to school, so he moved back to his native California, where he was tapped by Cesar Chavez, who said to him, "I'm organizing farm workers, migrant workers, in what is going to be a major labor struggle, and I need help." And so for 10 years, Marshall Ganz became Cesar Chavez's right-hand man in what became the United Farm Workers and one of the most historic labor struggles this country has ever seen. Literally going door to door, knocking on farm workers' homes saying, stand up for your rights, you can do this. Si se puede, yes we can. That's where it began. Well, after doing that for a number of years, he then went independent and did community organizing, civil rights organizing, grassroots organizing all around the country until he went back to Harvard in 1991 to complete his undergraduate degree, went to the Kennedy School to get his master's, and now, as I said, he is a lecturer in public policy. When it comes to leading change at the grassroots level, getting people to rise up, work together, and make change in this country, few people speak as authoritatively as Marshall Ganz. And a few years ago, he was interviewed by Bill Moyers, who talked to him about this model he has of 3 stories that leaders of change must tell. And rather than put words in Marshall Ganz's mouth, I want to let you hear a little clip of Moyers interviewing him about the 3 stories. So here's Bill Moyers and Marshall Ganz.
You've said that when you tell a story, the story becomes 3 stories.
Yes. Well, when we do public narrative is like a leadership skill of moving people to public action. So there's a story of self, which is using narrative to communicate why I've been called. So I tell a story that can communicate the values that move me. A story of us is using narrative to create a sense of the values we share as a community. And then the story of now is, do they experience the challenge to those values that requires action now? So it's sort of three pieces.
All right, there's a lot there. So let's go back and unpack that a little bit. The first story you have to tell is the story of self. If you're going to get up in front of people and say, people, we need to do this, we need to go in this direction, the first question they have, if they don't already know you intimately, is, who are you and what are you all about? What are your values? What is your stake in this issue? Why are you called to do this work? So the first story you have to tell is your story, why you are in this position and leading us in this direction. And then you need to move promptly to the story of us. Why are my values your values? What's the common ground we're standing on here? Why must we do this thing together? And once you've established that, you have to go to the story of now. Why is inaction no longer an option? Why must we move forward together right now? So 3 stories. And there are a lot of people who are adherents to this model. When Barack Obama was essentially introducing himself to the American public in 2004 at the Democratic National Convention, putting John Kerry's nomination, Obama made a very famous speech where he told these 3 stories. And he so believed in the model that when he ran in 2008 and 2012, he drafted Ganz to work for his campaign and to teach his campaign workers how to tell their stories as they went out and led meetings and led 2 successful campaigns. And someone else who's done it more recently is Elizabeth Warren. A year ago, March a year ago, when she was first introducing herself American public in the presidential campaign. She did a town hall on CNN, and during the town hall, Jake Tapper asked her this question: how did your family's financial problems during your childhood shape who you are today? Now, she's going to answer him in about 2 to 3 minutes, and she's going to do all 3 stories. So let's watch Elizabeth Warren. In the upper left-hand corner, I'll notate when she's in each of the stories, and then we'll go back and deconstruct. So here's Elizabeth Warren answering the question: how did your family's financial problems shape who you are today? Let's listen.
I'll tell you about that. So I have 3 older brothers. They all went off and joined the military. That was their ticket to America's middle class. I was the late in life baby. My mother always just called me the surprise. And about the time I was in middle school, my daddy had a heart attack, and it was serious. Thought he was going to die. The church neighbors brought covered dishes. It was a scary time. He survived, but he couldn't go back to work. And we lost our family station wagon. And at night, I'd hear my parents talk. And that's where I learned words like mortgage and foreclosure. And I remember the day that I walked into my parents' bedroom, and laying out on the bed is the dress. And some people here will know the dress. It's the one that only comes out for weddings, funerals, and graduations. And my mother's in her slip, and she's stocking feet, and she's pacing back and forth, and she's crying. She's saying, "We will not lose this house. We will not lose this house." She was 50 years old. She'd never worked outside the home. She was truly terrified. And I watched her while she finally just pulled it together, put that dress on, put on her high heels, blew her nose, and walked to the Sears and got a minimum wage job. And that minimum wage job saved our house, but more importantly, it saved our family. Anybody who wants to know me has just heard the story. But here's the thing for me now. For a long time, I used to think that was just a story about my mother. How when you get scared, you reach down, you find what you have to find, and you bring it up. And then years later, I came to understand this is a story about millions of Americans who, it doesn't matter if you're scared. When you got to do something to take care of people you love, you reach down, you find it, and you pull it up. And then it was years later that I came to understand it was also a story about government. Because when this happened to my family, the minimum wage in America would support a family of 3. It would take care of a mortgage, utilities, and put food on the table. Today in America, a full-time minimum wage job will not keep a mama and a baby out of poverty. I am in this fight because I believe that is wrong.
So just that first portion, the story of self, was only 259 words, less than 2 minutes to tell a good, compelling story of self. And that's what I want to focus on in the time we have remaining here. We don't have time to go to all 3 stories, but the story of self is the first story you have to tell. So let's look at all the things that she did right with so few words, so many things in so few words. Here's the first paragraph that she just said to you. And look what we have here. If I said the name Elizabeth Warren to you and played word association, you might say Senator, Massachusetts, liberal, consumer protection. You probably wouldn't say military family. But in fact, she is from a military family. And by putting that right up front, she is owning her own story. She's saying, others may define me other ways, but you need to know who I really am. I'm from a military family. And now thousands of families around the country may connect with her in ways that they never had before. You know, a little self-deprecation never hurts in storytelling. She doesn't say, my parents were thrilled when I arrived. You know, I was the surprise. And you saw she even got a laugh on that. Word choice throughout is very important. Not my father, not Peter, my daddy. And she's emotional and vulnerable. She talks about being a young girl and thinking that her father might pass away. It's hard to open up like that, but she does it very nicely. And throughout, there are visual details to help us see what she's talking about. 3 older brothers, middle school. She didn't say our neighbors were supportive. The church neighbors brought covered dishes. It's a whole lot of information right there as well. Here's the next paragraph. Again, talk about owning your own story. She's an expert in things like mortgages and foreclosure and consumer rights. But what she's saying to you is, I didn't learn all this. This isn't just book learning or legislation. This is something I knew as a child from my personal experiences. I grew up with this. It's deep in the bone for me. And then the centerpiece of the story, the dress. A lot of families with limited resources will relate to the dress, the one dress that comes out for weddings, funerals, and graduations. And again, emotional and vulnerable, talking about her mom pacing back and forth and crying. Visual details throughout to help us see what she's talking about. The station wagon, the dress, the slip, the stocking feet. And here's the last portion of the story of self. There's a little bit of dialogue here. She doesn't say, my mom was pacing back and forth talking to herself. She actually performs it. We will not lose this house. Dialogue and storytelling creates a sense of a scene. You are there, a fly on the wall. More specifics, 50 years old, the dress, the high heels, Sears. And then there's the emotion in her delivery. And you hear that not only in the text, but in the delivery as well. Sorry, there's a little noise in the background there. And in case you missed it, she tells you, you've just heard my story of self. So it's all right there. It's one of my favorite quotes from an activist named Chelsea Fuller. If we're going to be stewards of other people's stories, we can't mute or suppress our own. It's incumbent on us to tell our own stories. We only have a minute or two. I want to call Marshall Ganz back into the room. If you're thinking about telling your story of self, he has some more advice for you on how to do it. So one more dose of Marshall Ganz before we wrap up.
Now, story of self is, how many people find it really easy to talk about themselves? Oh boy, there's an exceptional person. She's going to have a seminar afterwards. You can kind of talk to her. What is it that we're so reticent about? Huh? Being revealed as imperfect. Oh boy, yeah. But we say, I don't want to be immodest, right? So I don't want to toot my own horn. And I mean, there's a lot of, the point is that in public life, you have no choice. See, we had a candidate ran for president a few years ago, John Kerry. People may remember that? He could never tell his own story. He had a great story, he could never tell it. So who told it for him? Swift boaters, the opposition. See, either you claim authorship of your own story or others will. And that's the deal. So then the question is to learn how to tell your story. And it's a matter of drawing on those moments and experiences that you can share, that others can begin to see you and establish. It's not resume, it's not titles, it's experiences. So people can get you. See, in a story of us, you're trying to get them to get each other. In a story of now, it's about getting the urgent moment. But in the story of self, it's about getting you. Why you're here doing this, what you care about.
If you want to have some fun later today, go check out this website, WDYD. Why do you do what you do? It's another way of telling your story of self. This was actually an art project by a guy named Tony Deifel. That's him in the picture. That's a selfie where he went around to ask people, why do you do what you do? And rather than ask for an entire story of self, he gave them a little card and said, write your answer there, and I'll take a picture of it. And so there's a whole website filled with these pictures. Some of them look like this. Why do you do what you do? This guy obviously in construction. One of my favorites, I have control issues. I want everyone to be happy. Because neutral is a ridiculous gear. I'm pretty sure that's not Matthew 28:19. And there's some famous people on the site. Anybody recognize this person?
Gloria Steinem.
It is Gloria Steinem. That's correct. So thank you, streamers. I hope you enjoyed the Marshall Ganz model of storytelling. If you want to read more about him, just Google Marshall Ganz. There's a lot of good stuff online. But hopefully our groups are coming back now, and we're going to talk a little bit more about story structure. So let's just wait for everybody to come back into the room.
Looks like we have one group left.
Okay, very good. I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I want to see everybody.
Okay. Oh.
All right, I think we've got everybody.
Got one of those guys doing mow and blow outside my window. So are you hearing that noise, or is it just me? You're not hearing it? Good. All right, good. So here's what I want to do. You just heard in your group 4 or 5 stories about a time when somebody wanted something, right? Now, what I want to ask you is this question. Besides the theme of somebody wanting something, what did you find that the stories had in common? It's my belief that when people are asked to tell a story, I gave you no instructions about how to tell a story, right? No, I just said, tell a story. You all did it. I'm sure you all did it very well. But I would predict that you tended to do certain things the same way, even though you had no instructions. So think about your group. Think about the 3 or 4 or 5 stories you heard, and think about things that the stories had in common, that everybody kind of did the same way, regardless of no instructions. When you have something, raise your hand. I can see everybody now. I'll call on you. Eileen, you're first. Something everyone did the same way. Unmute your line, please.
An obstacle of something in getting in the way of what you want.
Very good. Stories absolutely require this. If a story is simply, there's this thing I wanted, I went out and got it, it's mine, good for you, nobody cares. Obstacles make stories interesting. That's where you get drama. That's where you get conflict. That's where you get tension. So Eileen, thank you for naming one of the most important things. What else? Let's see another hand. Elena, unmute, please. Everyone's gonna, you can all unmute your lines if you want.
Yeah, Elena.
Elena.
Like some context, relatable context provided at the beginning.
Yes. I didn't tell you, when you start your story, please give us the year, your age, or geographic location. But I'm imagining that you probably did that. I was 5. I was in New York. I was Boston. It was 1975. Whatever. People will start with some context because stories need a clear starting line. We need to know, okay, if it's about somebody wanting something, where does this story begin? So context at the beginning, absolutely crucial. What else? Erin.
Everybody talked about their feelings, how either wanting them made them feel something, or getting the thing made them feel something, or not getting the thing made them feel. So feelings were heavily prominent.
Absolutely, because stories are containers of emotion. When we tell a story and we share our feelings, something very good happens because human beings are wired to feel and reflect emotion. You have in your brain these things called mirror neurons. I don't know if you ever heard that term. You know how when someone yawns, you instinctively yawn? Someone starts crying, you feel like crying? Well, that's because of neurons. You are wired to reflect emotion. So when someone tells you a story and they show emotion, you feel emotion, and we connect in a unique way. Ira Glass from This American Life puts it very nicely. He says, stories are engines of empathy. So, Erin, thank you for that. Other things we have in common. Laura Barnett.
Loved ones were brought into the room. So we met husbands, friends, sisters, babies. We were rendered. People were rendered for us.
And that's because stories are always about people. We tell stories to learn how to navigate the human condition. So even if we're talking about wanting a thing, even if we're talking about an abstract concept, policy change, it still starts with people because that's what we connect to. That's what we identify with. Laura, excellent. Anything else? Jessica Barrett.
So like, even though it was part of the prompt, everyone had a goal in their story.
Yes, and that's it. You know, it was this prompt was not random, and I'll talk about this in a moment. But basically, think about a movie you've seen recently, TV show you're binging, book you're reading. I'm willing to wager that the plot, the storyline, generally boils down to who's it about and what do they want. And once you know that, you can follow the story. So yes, the reason we said a time when you wanted something is because that's absolutely essential to storytelling. There has to be the pursuit of something. And as Eileen pointed out, there have to be obstacles in the way to make it interesting. And as Elena said, there have to be context at the beginning so we know where we start. And as Erin said, there has to be emotion because that's what connects us to the story. I think we've got just about anything else that anybody noticed? Anything else that we haven't mentioned? Lara.
Some kind of ending, something that you're left with, an idea or
Yes.
Some learning experience, something like that.
You guys are good. You're getting it all. Yes, there has to be a clear resolution. That at the end of the story, if the promise is, I'm going to tell you a story about a time when I wanted something, my promise to you is by the end of this story, you're either going to find out that I got it, success, or I didn't get it, but there's a reason I tell you the story. There is meaning at the ending. I think you've got just about everything. Rosalie, I see your hand is up. Do you have something to add?
I think all of our stories had humor in them.
And I would put humor under the category of emotion. Humor, pathos, whatever. Anything that gets the emotions cooking is a good thing. Anybody else? Yes, Robin.
Sense of place, like somebody was coming from church, somebody was
Yes.
in an airplane seat, somebody's backyard, lots of visual things to sort of hang my hat on.
Well, the physical location, yes, but also the visuals is a key word. When you tell a story and all the audience has is the words coming out of your mouth, no pictures, no video, nothing to supplement, the more visual you can make it, the better chance that they can see it in their mind's eye and then feel it in their heart. Susan, your hand was up. Do you have something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that in our breakout room, there was some sort of a shift in the storyteller in their initial idea, and through going through the process, there was some surprise shift in our own thinking.
Yes, because stories are transformational, not only for the audience, but for the teller as well. Let me come back to my screen here because I want to show you. You guys did great. Let's look at this graphically about what your stories had in common. And let's look at the basic structure of a good, memorable, persuasive story. And it starts here. All good stories start by introducing us to the protagonist, the person we're going to follow through the story. In your stories, it was you and about this thing that you want. So you started by telling us something about yourself at the beginning, the context, what we call your world in balance before anything happens. And once we know where you are and have a starting point, then something happens to kick the story into motion. We call that thing the inciting incident. That's the moment when you see something and decide, I want that thing. I see this beautiful bike in the window of this toy store. I got to have it. Somebody wants something, a story's in motion. Ian pointed out, what happens next is crucial. On the way to the goal, there has to be some type of barrier or obstacle, something to create a little bit of dramatic tension. And I'll call in another authority here. I'm sure you're familiar with Aaron Sorkin, West Wing, Social Network. Look at what he says. And this isn't just me and Aaron talking. This is 70,000 years of human history talking. We have literally evolved as a species to need these things in our stories. And I'm going to prove it to you. We're going to do a short course in human history right now. Bear with me. Let's jump back in time 70,000 years. You see these two cave people? You see that bush in the distance between them, behind them? Well, 70,000 years ago on a given day, they turned around and noticed the bush was shaking. Now, it doesn't normally do this. It normally just sits there, bush-like. And there's no wind, so there's no reason for it to be shaking. But it's shaking. Well, the caveman on the left observes this unusual phenomenon, and he thinks this. The caveman on the right saw the very same thing, but he thinks this. And unmoved by this unusual event, the caveman on the right went his merry way, whistling a merry tune, a toothed tiger leapt out of the shaking bush and ate him alive. The caveman on the left, he survives. His DNA gets passed down. We are his descendants. The caveman on the right, not so much. So the point is, and it's a serious one, we human beings, Homo sapiens, we have evolved to pay very close attention when something happens that we don't expect. And 70,000 years when we're telling stories to capture a slice of life, we don't have, tigers leaping out of bushes, but we need to have some shaking bush moment where our audience leans forward and goes, oh, didn't see that coming. So then what'd you do? And if we can navigate that barrier, only to run into another and another after that, well, more times than not, the more the merrier. With every new barrier, you've ratcheted up the tension, a little more interest. Is she ever going to get there? Is he ever going to do it? Until we surmount the last barrier and we get to the goal. Maybe we do get to the goal. It's a success story. Or maybe we don't, but there's a clear resolution. What you're looking at here, what I believe you did, with no instructions from me, is to tell the 3-act structure of storytelling. Act 1, the beginning, the questions, who is this story about and what do they want? Act 2, the middle, the pursuit of the thing, running into problems, solving problems. Act 3, the end. What happens and what does it mean? And this is not my structure. This is not a white thing or a Western thing. This belongs to no race, creed, religion, nationality. This is the human experience of storytelling as it's practiced around the globe and has been for thousands of years. And so the point is, if you tell a story that has all these elements, trust me, something starts to vibrate very deep in the hearts and minds of your audience, and they think, this story has it all. Now, one final example to bring it home. I want to show you a public service announcement for a group called Surfers Healing, works out here in Southern California. They're going to tell their story in 60 seconds. But I want you to watch this closely, because watch how in 60 seconds they will answer all the questions of a good story in order. Who's it about? What does he want? What stands in his way to make it interesting? How does he navigate those barriers? Where do we end up? And what does it mean? Now, those stories are not asked and answered explicitly, but it's all there. So watch closely, and then I'm going to call on a couple of you to answer those questions. So let's watch Surfers Healing.
My name is Izzy Paskowitz, and I've been running surf camps for autistic kids for 7 years. We get them down to the beach. The kids are going to scream. Some of the kids, they don't know how to speak. The only words that come out of their mouth is screaming. What's perfect for us to see that screaming and the kicking when they go out, and when they turn around and ride that wave in, it's just nothing like it. And there's the parents, tears in their eyes, saying, man, we've had a lot of tough times, but today was just a perfect day.
There you go. Isn't that lovely? So, Eileen, would you unmute your line? I'm going to call on you first. Sheila, you're going to be second. Laura, you're going to be third. Eileen, you ready? There you go.
Yes, I'm ready. Thank you.
All right. Eileen, who would you say is the protagonist of this story?
I think the little boy that loves surfing.
Want to try again?
Sure. The protagonist of the story is
the narrator?
The narrator, yes. That's just what I was going to say.
Yes, I knew you were really thinking that. See, the thing is that our hearts immediately go to the kids. What you did is very natural and happens all the time. We love the kids, but they're not the protagonists. They're not the one sort of driving the action. They're not serving as our guide to the story. It's really Izzy Paskowitz. He happens to be the founder of this nonprofit, and he introduced himself right from the top. So he's our protagonist. And Eileen, I'll stick with you for a second. I'll give you another chance.
Thank you.
What is his goal? What is he trying to accomplish on the beaches of Southern California?
To show the value of the experience that he's going to introduce these kids to.
I think that's a fancy way of saying it. We're really just trying to share the joy of surfing. We're not curing autism today. We're trying to take these kids out and give these kids and the parents a great day. Okay, Sheila, unmute your line. I'm going to come to you next. Sheila Reed Howell. There you go, Sheila. Okay. Sheila, what's the barrier? If he wants to share the joy of surfing, what's the barrier? What's he up against?
Well, I first want to say that I'm a proud parent of a 15-year-old autistic son, Justin, and I love him so much. So I would say that the barrier would be acceptance. I would say the barrier would be understanding how the kids would respond. And it really touched me when I watched this, that the barrier was the fact that their only form of communication for some kids was the vocal, or maybe I saw expressions, I saw physical activity. So I think it was, the barrier was just overcoming the acceptance of dealing with how they would respond to it.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think that's here's the way I simply say it is, you're right. The kids don't want to go. So the barrier is, how do you deal with that, with the kicking, the screaming, the vocalizations, etc., and the fact that kids do not want to be part of the experience. It's noisy, it's different, it's strange. It's really challenging to them. So Sheila, sticking with you for a second, from what you saw in the video, how do they respond to that barrier? What do they do?
Total acceptance, total understanding, not skipping a beat, just going with them, accepting the kids as they were. And
taking them out there. They're saying, yeah, we understand, we get it, except you're going. And by the way, Sheila, just some background. The whole idea of this nonprofit came from Izzy's experience. He has a son with autism, and one day his son was pitching a fit, and he couldn't get him to calm down how, but it's a surfing family, so he just took him out on his board, and his son was instantly calm, and he thought, wait, there's something here. And that became the inspiration for the nonprofit.
Yes, and I've learned to do the same with my son as well, just exposing him.
Yeah. So Laura Barnett, coming to you last. Laura, what is the meaning of the story? I'll give you a hint, and please unmute your line, Laura. This is a public service announcement for ESPN. So what meaning do they give this story?
Conquer fear, find joy and community through movement and risk. Love.
That's lovely and high-minded.
I don't know. In 60 seconds, yeah.
Because it's ESPN, sports. What they're saying is that there's more to sports than who won or lost. That in this case, the sport of surfing, can have a higher value. But look, the main point here is, again, look at the story. When you watched it, you probably thought, beautiful visuals, nice music. It's a beautifully put together spot, but it sits on this very solid structure, answering the questions that are instinctively in your mind, whether you know it or not. Who's it about? What does he want? What stands in his way to make it interesting? How does he overcome those problems? Where do we end up? And what does it mean? What I'd like to do is I'd like to throw it open for questions and comments. I'm going to unshare my screen for a second so I can see you all again. If you have a question or a comment, raise your hand. I'll call on you. And then, Sam, I'd just like to bring it back for just a little bit of housekeeping and one last thought. So, questions and comments? Sorry, Stephen, go ahead, please. Yes.
Just wanted to say that I'm really enjoying the materials that you're presenting, and I'm actively thinking about how I could teach this to my students, starting next week.
Rosalie, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Stephen, did I see your hand up? If so, unmute your line.
Yeah, this is terrific. I as a ELA person, I very deeply believe in what you're saying. So I want to give that preface to a question that otherwise might sound contrarian. I'm just curious, knowing that we have a bias towards a certain narrative structure as people, is there any danger that it might actually affect or bias or shape what we want to say? For example, putting a resolution on something that isn't yet resolved. And when I think about things that we teach or things that we present to others, is there any dangers to watch out for when we're using these sorts of structures to craft the stories that we tell to children or to adults?
I wouldn't say dangers so much as the biggest mistake I see in storytelling, particularly in sort of the public interest space, is the mistake of lacking true obstacles. When I see stories about education, for example, they'll talk about a child who comes to school from a difficult background, maybe the first in his family to go to college or something like that, and then enters the institution, has a wonderful experience, comes out the other side, a better person. And it's sort of like, there were no real barriers there. There's no real story. It's just sort of like, it's like the broken person model of storytelling, where they come in broken, we fix them and they have no agency in it. That's maybe one of the most common problems I see. It's not structural, Stephen. It's not about structure so much as using the structure to tell stories that unfortunately shortchange the people we're talking about. Daniel Murray, your hand is up. Go ahead, please, Daniel. Laura, I see you'll be next.
Thanks. So in terms of applying this to our role in the classroom, I think obviously the framework of storytelling is essential to help students tell their stories in a creative sense. But from a pedagogical standpoint, I think we saw in the other exercise, concision is the key to stories, right? Part of telling a good story is saying it in the least amount of words, the most captivating words. So do you have a rule of thumb or any particular advice when it comes to keeping your stories tight and concise?
Well, the answer is, Daniel, here's the always insufficient, it depends. If someone is a good storyteller, they can go 3, 4, 5 minutes and hold you wrapped. And if they're a bad storyteller, 30 seconds is too long. So I generally err on the side of concision, tell people, let's try and do it within 2 minutes. And having done this exercise literally more than 500 times, I can tell you that 2 minutes is plenty of time to tell a good story. In fact, during the live stream, I shared Elizabeth Warren telling a story that was 1 minute and 59 seconds. So it can be done. I'm generally also a believer in less is more. But there's no golden rule here. If you're a good storyteller, you can command more time. Bad storyteller, 30 seconds is too long. Lara, your hand was up. Can we go to you next? Unmute your phone, please, or your line.
Kind of just a comment, but I'm a dance teacher. And so I've been doing a lot of live teaching with my youngest students who are in pre-K. And but I love listening to the moth. I just love stories, and I've never sort of had it so clearly spelled out, these steps to telling a story. So I think this is such a valuable tool to have, especially now that it's so hard to capture the imagination of our students and to keep them interested in coming back to us in this format. And so I'm just sort of rethinking everything I'm teaching and how to grab kids and bring them in. And this is really helping. So thank you.
Thank you, Laura, for that. Sam, I see your hand is up and we have just 3 minutes left, correct? I can't hear you. So you're muted, Sam.
Unmute myself. What's the word count of a 2 minute story? Do you know?
Well, in the story that Elizabeth Warren told, in 2 minutes, it was 259 words. Let me do this. Let me do a little bit of housekeeping and then one last story, and then I'll turn it back to Sam and Renee so we can end on time. I just want to show you one more thing, if you don't mind. If you have found today interesting and you want to stay in touch, I do a monthly newsletter called Free Range Thinking, which is only about best practices in communications in the whole public interest community. So I think that includes you guys. You can go to my website, thegoodmancenter.com, sign up for it for free. Just give us your email address. We'll send it to you once a month, and we won't do anything else with your email address. In between newsletters, I tweet under the name Goodman Center if I see something timely, a documentary, a book, a resource, something for you to watch. I will tweet you a link to that so you can stay current at Goodman Center. I want to say a big thank you to Sam and Renee for giving me this opportunity to work for you. It's been a pleasure. And my last thought before I let you go, I collect stories from all around the world. I find inspiration in all these stories. The last story of the day comes from France, from Canal Plus, which is a film company you may know about. And the moral of the story is never underestimate the power of a good story. So let's go out on this.
Thank you.
embarqué dans un camion de livraison. Et puis j'ai atterri ici. Oh, c'est incroyable. Hein? T'entends ça, chérie?
Ben oui, c'est fou.
Thank you, everybody. It's been a pleasure working with you. Take care now.
Thank you, Andy Goodman. That was
Thank you.
marvelous. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Renee. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you all for teaching. The Academy for Teachers loves you. Stay in touch, come to our other programs, and keep teaching.
Thank you. And I want to add my thanks as well, and to ask that a minute ago you received in your email boxes